Hi, I want us to begin in total silence. Imagine a sound none of us wants to hear by our bed. A piercing, monotonous, endless beep from a medical monitor. This is the sound of a boundary. In that second, a person's heart stops and blood stops pushing oxygen through the veins. Doctors call it cardiac arrest. It is the moment when the biological clock stops. Within 10, at most 20 seconds after the last heartbeat, the electrical activity of the cerebral cortex falls to zero. A flat line on the electroencephalogram. From the point of view of modern academic science, the lights inside the skull go out at that moment. There should be no dreams, no thoughts, no pain, no fear, no memory, only darkness and entropy. Like a turned-off television, the screen goes dark and the picture is gone forever. But if that is true, if brain death is just the end of an electrical circuit, then why do thousands of people whom doctors pulled back from the brink with defibrillators and adrenaline tell the same story? Why, when their television was off, did they watch a film that felt more real than our life? I am not a priest. I am not a medium. I am a researcher and a skeptic. I tend to trust data, not legends. So I decided to run an experiment that once would have been impossible. We live in an era of big data and artificial intelligence. We have tools that can find patterns where the human eye sees only chaos. I took 5,000 detailed reports of clinical death. These were open records from international archives, from a foundation that studies near-death experiences, and from an international NDE database. They were gigabytes of text, accounts from people of all ages, from many professions, from many faiths. From a housewife in Oklahoma to a neurosurgeon who himself ended up on the operating table. I fed this dataset into a state-of-the-art language model. My mission was cynical. I wanted to find mistakes. I wanted to find contradictions. I wanted to prove that it was all just the ravings of a dying consciousness. A chaotic jumble of images made by a panicking brain. I gave an AI a clear instruction. Analyze the semantics. Find the structure. Ignore religious terms. Look only for facts of perception. I asked the AI whether there is a universal dying script that does not depend on culture. What the algorithm returned made me, a grown man, close my laptop and stare at one point for a long time. The data painted a picture that does not fit in biology textbooks. Today we will pick it apart, step by step, no hysteria, no mysticism, only facts, logic, and cool analysis of 5,000 deaths. This is an investigation into what awaits every one of us. Let us start with the physics of the process. What is death for our body? It is a cascade of shutdowns. First, the heart stops. Blood pressure falls to zero. Brain cells, the neurons, are the hungriest energy users in our body. They need oxygen and glucose without interruption. The moment supplies stop, neurons have only a tiny margin, seconds. The ion pumps that keep the cell's electrical charge running stop. Chaos begins. The cell loses the ability to send signals. From the outside, this looks like a loss of consciousness. A person collapses. Pupils dilate and stop reacting to light. This is clinical death. Doctors know this. They have about 5 minutes to restart the heart before the brain begins to break down beyond repair. It is in that short interval between cardiac arrest and resuscitation that science points to the near-death experience, what researchers call the NDE. Skeptics say it is just hallucinations. But let us think logically. What is a hallucination? It is a malfunction, an error. If you give thousands of people LSD or throw them into delirium, each will see their own private nightmare. One will see pink elephants, another will see geometric patterns, A third will relive the memory of forgetting to turn off the iron. Hallucinations are chaotic and individual. They depend on your past, on your fears, on what you ate for breakfast. But when I asked AI to compare 5,000 death reports, it found a rigid, almost architectural pattern. In 60, and in some samples 70% of cases, the scenario repeats with chilling precision. This is not chaos. It is a strict sequence of events. AI picked out 4 key stages people go through, no matter where they live. Stage 1. A feeling of separation. The person suddenly realizes they no longer feel pain. There was agony a moment ago, a crushed chest in a car crash, a heart tearing with a heart attack, and then a click. Absolute lightness, absolute silence. Patients often describe it like this: I just stepped out of the suit that pinched me. Stage 2. A view from above, autoscopy. The person sees their body. They see the doctors. They see the bustle. They see the nurse cutting at their clothes. But they are not looking with their eyes. They are looking from the ceiling, from the corner of the room. And the most surprising thing that AI noticed in the text sentiment analysis is complete calm. The person watches their dead body with curiosity, not terror, like an audience member at a play. Stage 3. The passage. The famous tunnel. Although AI points out that not everyone uses the word tunnel. Some say tube, some say valley, some say a funnel into darkness. But the physics of it is the same. Movement at enormous speed through dark space toward a point of light. And finally, stage 4. The light. This is not just a lamp or a spotlight. In almost every report, people describe this color as a living being, an intelligence. A light that knows everything, a light that loves. And here we come to the first big mystery, the first loop in our story. The mystery of universality. Skeptics often say, oh, that's just a cultural code. You saw a movie about a tunnel. You read books. Your dying brain feeds you a familiar image to calm you. Sounds very logical, right? Expectations shape reality. I decided to test that hypothesis with AI. I gave a neural network this task. Compare how a Christian from Texas, a Hindu from Delhi, and a convinced atheist from Berlin describe the essence of the light. Find the difference in the storyline. And you know what the algorithm answered? There is no difference in the storyline. The only difference is the labels. The Christian says, I saw Christ. The Hindu might say, I saw a hole or an angel. The atheist says, I encountered a lump of pure energy and infinite intelligence. But when you strip away the religious terms, when you peel the language back to the core, it turns out they are describing the same being. It does not condemn. It has a sense of humor. It communicates telepathically, transmitting huge amounts of information instantly. It radiates what people call unconditional love. The strongest argument against the cultural programming theory came from analyzing children's reports. The database contains cases of clinical death in children under 5. Little kids, they have not watched Hollywood dramas. They have not read Moody. They do not really know what death is. For them, death might mean a bird that no longer flies. Yet they report the same thing. A child may say, I flew through the slide tube, or I went into a hollow in a tree where it was light. The metaphors are childish, but the structure of the experience is adult. Leaving the body, the light, the meeting. If this is cultural programming, where does a 3-year-old get it? If it is a hallucination, why is it the same for everyone? Why does our brain, this most complex biological computer, just before burning out, run the same farewell program? And most important, why? Think about evolution. Evolution is stingy and efficient. It favors the survival of the species. If an antelope dies in a lion's jaws, or a prehistoric human falls off a cliff, what sense is there in spending precious remaining brain energy to show the dying a beautiful movie in ultra-high definition with stereo sound? If you die, you are out of the game. Spending resources on your comfort is biologically pointless. It would make much more sense to simply flip the switch. Darkness is the end. But for some reason, instead of darkness, the brain, or whatever lives inside it, explodes into intense activity and clarity. A clarity that, survivors say, feels more real than anything I have seen on Earth. It is a paradox that has kept scientists awake for 50 years. I promise to stay objective. I promise not to fall into blind faith. Science has its answers to these questions, and they sound convincing, harsh, materialistic. Scientists say, don't fool yourself. This is not a soul. This is chemistry. We have to listen to that version, because if we want the truth, we must first try to tear the miracle apart. So let us hear the advocates of materialism. What goes on in a neuroscientist lab when they hear about a light at the end of a tunnel? They smile and pull out a chart of neurotransmitters. Here is the prosecution's case. There is no soul. Your mystical experience is just a system bug, the last flash of a dying computer. This is the stance of hardline materialism. And to be fair, it has very strong arguments. When the heart stops, the brain panics. Imagine a submarine with a breach that is sinking. Life support systems fail, one after another. Emergency lights flicker red. Crew members run in terror. The captain, our brain, tries to save what is left of consciousness by jettisoning everything unnecessary. Argument number 1, the skeptic's favorite, is hypoxia, a lack of oxygen. Any fighter pilot or high-altitude climber knows this effect. When the brain does not get enough air, the visual cortex is the first to suffer. Peripheral vision cuts out. The picture darkens at the edges. Only a bright point remains in the center. There you have a physiological explanation for the tunnel and the light at the end. No pearly gates. Just the optic nerve starting to fail because of a drop in pressure. Sounds like the perfect explanation, right? It settles the tunnel question once and for all. I decided to test it. I asked AI to cross-reference medical reports on the symptoms of acute hypoxia with a database of near-death experiences, and to find the similarities and differences in cognitive function during oxygen deprivation and during clinical death. And here the tidy theory begins to wobble. Yes, the tunnel visual matches, but there is a huge but that the algorithm flagged. Hypoxia produces confusion. In medicine, that is called delirium. A person becomes disoriented. They forget who they are. They cannot do 2 + 2. Their speech becomes incoherent. It looks like severe drunkenness or delirium. Now look at reports from people who came back. They describe a state of hyperreality. They say, "I thought more clearly than I ever have. My mind was razor sharp. I remembered everything down to the smallest detail." I ran a semantic analysis on those texts, and the verdict was clear. The speech in near-death descriptions is far more complex, logical, and coherent than in accounts from people who suffered hypoxia. Hypoxia is the rant of a drunk sailor. A near-death experience is a precise field report from a scout. These are two different brain states. Argument number 2, the chemical storm. Skeptics say, okay, it is not just lack of oxygen, it is drugs. In a moment of mortal danger, our body behaves like a ransacked pharmacy. To shield us from the pain of shock, the brain dumps massive doses of endorphins into the bloodstream. These are natural opiates. They bring bliss, calm, and detachment. There is also a popular hypothesis about DMT, dimethyltryptamine. This is an extremely powerful psychedelic that some scientists think our pineal gland might produce. The theory says that in the moment of death, the pineal gland ejects its entire supply of DMT, and the dying person simply experiences one last, unbelievably intense high. That would explain the out-of-body sensations, encounters with entities, and the feeling of unconditional cosmic love. I went back to the data. I did not argue with the biochemists. I did what AI does best. I compared patterns. I fed the model hundreds of trip reports. We fed descriptions of hallucinations from people who had taken DMT and nicotine into an AI and asked it to compare them with a database of clinical death experiences. Then we told it to find the differences in the storylines. That was probably the most interesting stage of the experiment because the AI found a fundamental divide. A drug trip is chaos. Fractals, dancing gnomes, warped geometry, melting walls. The hallucinations are often frightening, aggressive, and utterly meaningless. There is no plot. A chair becomes a dog. A dog becomes a cloud. A near-death experience is structure. It is a narrative. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There are no geometry glitches. People see themselves. They see their hands. They see dead relatives who look completely normal. The AI singled out a parameter called image stability. In drug delirium, the images are unstable. In clinical death, grandma stays grandma. She does not turn into a purple triangle. And the biggest difference is the life review, which we will talk about later. Neither nicotine nor DMT forces a person to relive their life and judge their actions from a moral point of view. Chemistry can produce a picture, but chemistry cannot give a moral lesson. There is one more phenomenon that medicine records but desperately tries not to notice because it breaks the whole materialist picture of the world. The phenomenon is called terminal lucidity. Imagine a patient with the worst form of Alzheimer's or dementia. Their brain is physically ruined. Where neural connections should be, there is emptiness and amyloid plaques. Brain tissue is atrophied. This person has not recognized their children for years. They cannot string two words together. They have forgotten how to hold a spoon. For doctors and relatives, their personality is gone. Only the body remains. And then, a few hours or minutes before death, something incredible happens. The person comes into full, crystal clear consciousness. They recognize their loved ones. They call them by name. They remember important dates. They speak meaningfully, deeply, and calmly. They say goodbye, and then they die. I found in medical archives dozens of cases like this, all confirmed by doctors. Wait a minute. If consciousness is just the product of neurons, as materialism claims, how is this possible? If you smash a hard drive with a hammer, you cannot suddenly boot Windows from it. If the hardware is broken, the software does not run. But in cases of terminal lucidity, we see a shattered brain suddenly working perfectly for 5 minutes. Where does that signal come from? How can a brain reduced to a vegetative state produce complex speech and memory? Materialism tells us the brain generates consciousness the way the liver generates bile. No liver, no bile. But terminal lucidity suggests a different hypothesis. A hypothesis that scares scientists because it seems unscientific, but one we cannot ignore. What if the brain is not a generator? What if the brain is merely a receiver, an antenna? Consciousness exists outside the brain like a radio wave exists outside a receiver. Disease damages the receiver, the sound goes fuzzy. It disappears and we hear only static, but the station keeps broadcasting. And just before the receiver finally burns out, in a final moment the resistance drops and the signal comes through clean. It is a beautiful theory, but sadly it is still only a theory. Everything we have talked about so far, the tunnels, the meetings with grandmothers, even sudden clarity of mind, is still subjective experience. A skeptic can always say, "You imagined it. It is all tricks of the mind." Subjective experience is a weak witness in court. You cannot build a case on it. We need ironclad evidence. We need facts that can be checked by the clock, by medical records, and by surveillance cameras. And the most frightening thing for skeptics is that such facts exist. There are cases where people did not just see light and feel love. They floated beneath the ceiling of the intensive care unit and saw what was happening in the room while their body was dead. They saw things that they physically could not have seen from the operating table. They repeated the doctor's conversations word for word. They described the instruments the nurse took from a cabinet behind their back. This is called veridical perception. This is the moment where mystery stops and detective work begins, because you can no longer explain this away with chemistry or hypoxia. I found the reports from the Near-Death Project, and what is written there makes the hairs on your neck stand up. Ready to learn what dead patients saw while doctors were filling out their death paperwork? We are coming up on the halfway point of our investigation and on the most dangerous part. Until now, a skeptic could sit back and smile. Tunnels are hypoxia. Light is endorphins. Seeing relatives is a psychological defense. You can stretch the brain explanation to cover all of that. But now we cross a line where materialist explanations start to fall apart. We are going to talk about facts, not feelings, not emotions, but hard documented facts that are recorded in medical charts. In the science of near-death experiences, there is a term that gives every conservative neurobiologist a nervous twitch. Veridical perception. Reliable perception. It is when a person in clinical death, with a stopped heart and the brain offline, sees and hears real events. Events that take place in the operating room, in the hallway, or even outside. And most important, later, when they are resuscitated, they recount those events down to the smallest detail. This is the second loop in our story, the grown-up standards of truth. If I tell you I flew to Mars in a dream, you cannot check that. But if I say that while I was out, I saw you put a green pen in your left pocket and drop a coin under the table, and then the coin really is there, then we have a problem. I asked AI to filter a database of 5,000 reports for veridical events. I looked for cases where the patient's words were confirmed by medical staff. AI returned hundreds of matches. Let's go through the most striking ones. They sound like detective stories, but they are medical chronicles. Case 1. A man with dentures. This happened in a clinic in the Netherlands and was documented by cardiologist Pim van Lommel. They bring a man into the emergency room. He is 44 years old, a massive heart attack. He is already blue. His heart is not beating. He is not breathing. The doctors start intubation. They put a tube down his throat to hook him up to a ventilator. A nurse notices he has a denture, the upper one. He pulls the denture out so it will not get in the way of the tube and places it on the trolley's pull-out tray among a pile of bandages and bottles. The resuscitation goes on for a long time, 1.5 hours of fighting to save him. Electric shocks and chest compressions. They restart his heart. He is still in a coma and is taken to intensive care. He only regains consciousness a week later. And then comes the moment of truth. The same nurse walks into the room to check the medicine. The patient sees him and says, "You know where my teeth are?" The nurse is stunned. He is sure the patient cannot remember him. During the resuscitation, the patient was in deep clinical death. The patient goes on, "Yes, you were there. You took out my teeth and put them on that cart with the bottles, in the lower pull-out drawer." The nurse opens it and finds the denture right there. I uploaded this case to an AI and asked it to analyze the probability of a random guess. What are the odds that the patient would correctly name a specific nurse's action and the exact location of the item by chance? The answer, the probability, is essentially within statistical error. The patient could not have seen this physically. His eyes were closed. He was unconscious. More than that, he described the scene from above. He said he saw his bald head. He saw the doctors rushing around his body. Skeptics say maybe he heard it. Hearing is supposed to be the last sense to go. Fine, assume that. But could you hear exactly which drawer they put a denture into? Could you hear what the nurse looked like? Someone you had never seen before. Case 2. Blue tennis shoe. This is a classic case described by Kimberly Clark Sharp. The patient was Maria. She had a cardiac arrest. After resuscitation, she claimed her consciousness left her body. She said it flew out of the room and hovered outside the hospital at the level of the 3rd floor. She told the doctor she had seen, on the window ledge, a forgotten tennis shoe, old and worn, dark blue. She added a detail. The sock was worn through at the little toe, and the lace was tucked under the heel. The doctor, out of pure curiosity, went to check. He walked around the building and found that window. The shoe was indeed on the ledge. But the scary part was this. The scuff on the little toe and the tucked lace could only be seen from a position floating in the air outside the window. You could not see that from the room. You could not see it from the ground. I asked an AI if this could be a false memory, cryptomnesia. Maybe she had seen the shoe before. Analysis shows Maria arrived at the hospital at night by ambulance in critical condition. She physically could not have walked along the 3rd floor ledges. How do you explain this in terms of brain chemistry? You cannot. Hallucinations happen inside the head. If you see a pink elephant, that elephant is not standing in the room. But if you see a real shoe on a real ledge, that is not a hallucination. That is an observation. And that observation was made by a point of consciousness that was several meters from the body. To settle the debate between mystic and fact, scientists launched Project Aware. This was the largest scientific study of clinical death in history. It was led by Dr. Sam Parnia, a world-renowned resuscitation doctor. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. If people really leave their bodies and float near the ceiling, let us test it. In resuscitation rooms in hospitals across the United States and Europe, they installed special shelves up near the ceiling. If people really leave their bodies and float near the ceiling, let us test it. In resuscitation rooms in hospitals across the United States and Europe, they installed special shelves up near the ceiling. The doctors could not see them either. The logic was simple. If you claim your soul floated under the ceiling, tell us what is pictured on the image. I went through the results of this study, and I need to be honest, the findings are mixed. Not a single patient who came back from the brink in this particular study named the picture. Skeptics cheered. Ha, they said, got you. No afterlife, just fantasies. But Dr. Parnia did not rush to that conclusion because there was a sampling problem. Most patients died in wards where there were no pictures, or in hallways, or in the emergency room. Those who did die in the right rooms often came back with severe memory damage and remembered nothing. The Evra project recorded something different. It recorded cases where patients accurately described the sequence of actions of the resuscitation team. The sound of the defibrillator, the doctor's commands, charging 200. But the most interesting part is the timing. And here we come to the main paradox that tears materialism apart more effectively than any simple rebuttal. The paradox of time. Look, doctors know exactly when the brain switches off. About 20 seconds after the heart stops, the EEG goes flat. A straight line, no electrical activity. The hard drive is off. Nothing is being recorded. And yet patients report events that happened 2 to 5 minutes after the heart stopped. They describe procedures that were performed during the EEG flatline. I asked the AI how it is physically possible to form memory when the cortex is electrically silent. The AI's answer was short and terrifying for any physiologist. According to current models in neuroscience, it is impossible. Memory requires synapses and electrical impulses. If there are no impulses, there should be no memory. It is like trying to record a video with a camera that has had its battery removed. But the video is recorded, and it is stored in the consciousness of the person who returned. This brings us to a conclusion that academics are afraid to draw, but that seems unavoidable. Consciousness is not produced by the brain. Consciousness does not sit inside neurons. It uses the brain like a driver uses a car. If a car stalls, the driver does not vanish. He simply gets out. He still sees. He still hears. He still thinks. And judging by the 5,000 accounts I have read, he often feels better outside the car. He sees the world more clearly. He understands more. But there is another aspect that stunned me. And when AI analyzed those 5,000 reports, it singled out one feature of reliable perception that people rarely talk about. It is not just visual information. People do not simply see the doctors from above. They often feel the doctor's emotions. In one report, a woman described how a young doctor, trying to save her, was panicking. She could not see his face, but she felt his fear. She felt his desperate wish not to mess up on his first shift. She felt his thoughts. Later, when she recovered and told him about it, he broke down and cried because it was true. This is no longer just sight. This is empathic telepathy. And this happens at a moment when the brain is dead. On our table, we have the evidence: a denture, a blue shoe, corroborated conversations, memories formed in the silence of a flat EEG. Can you wave that off as coincidence? Once is chance, twice is coincidence, but 5,000 reports is statistics. And that statistic is shouting that death is not the end. Death is an exit. But where to? And more importantly, why do they come back at all? Why are those who saw that light, who felt that incredible love, forced to return to their sick, broken bodies? And why does the experience change them forever? We are nearing the finale, the answer to what all this means for us, the living. We have walked through the stages of denial, scientific analysis, and confrontation with unexplained facts. We have examined the physics of dying. We have seen how brain chemistry tries to explain the light, and how a denture can end up broken in a desk drawer. But within this mass of 5,000 reports, there is a chapter skeptics do not like at all, because it does not concern physics. It concerns conscience, the life review phenomenon. AI, analyzing the structure of these narratives, identified this stage as the emotional peak of the entire experience. This is not just your whole life flashing before your eyes like a cheap movie. It is not a chronological montage, born, married, died. It is a total holographic reliving of every moment, but from a very strange single angle. People describe it like this: I was both myself and the people I interacted with at the same time. If you hit someone in 5th grade, you do not just see the punch. You feel the pain in your fist, and at the same time you feel the humiliation and the physical pain of the person you hit. You feel the effects of that blow on their psyche for years to come. I asked the AI what the dominant emotion is during the life review. The machine's answer was astonishing. There is no external judge. There is no bearded God wagging a finger and sending you to hell. The judge is you. And that judge is far worse than any court, because you cannot excuse yourself and you cannot lie. All masks are stripped away. You feel every cut you gave the world and every joy you brought to it. It is the boomerang principle taken to the extreme. Skeptics say it is just the brain sorting memory files. But why would a dying brain, whose job is simply to shut down, run such a complex moral and ethical program? Why would evolution make us feel another person's pain right before death? There is no biological advantage. It does not look like fading away. It looks like a lesson, and that lesson changes people forever. I want to pause here for a moment. We do enormous work, sifting through thousands of pages of scientific reports to give you concentrated truth. If you like this deep, grown-up take on the mysteries of reality, support the channel by subscribing and leaving a like now. That helps the algorithms understand that you want these complex topics. Thank you. Let us move on. We come to the third psychological loop of our scenario: return. It would seem the person survived, the doctors performed a miracle, and the relatives are happy. Yet the returned person often falls into deep depression and notes a sharp contrast in the emotional tone between descriptions of that other world and this one. There is a place over there where everything is home, bright, loving, understanding, and easy. Here it is heavy, the body aches, colors are gray, gravity pulls, people do not understand each other, and social games suddenly feel pointless. People say, I feel like I came back from a colorful world to black and white. But along with that longing comes a fundamental shift in personality. Psychologists call it post-traumatic growth, but the scale of this change is abnormal. I asked AI to analyze how people's values change after a near-death experience. The result was clear. 90% of respondents completely lose the fear of death. They do not become braver. They simply stop seeing death as an end. For them, it is now like taking off a coat. Interest in material things drops. Money, career, and status start to seem like a silly sandbox fight. Altruism shoots up, and the desire to help others grows sharply. Remember the life review. They felt on their own skin that the only thing that matters there is how much love you gave here. You cannot fake that. You cannot simulate it. It is a full personality reprogramming during 5 minutes of clinical death. So where does that leave us? We have a basket of theories. Let us empty it on the table and see what remains. Version A is the super hallucination. The brain under extreme stress produces the most elaborate show to calm consciousness. The advantages of this version are that it explains the tunnel, hypoxia, and endorphin euphoria. The disadvantages smash it to pieces when faced with verifiable perceptions like the blue shoe, dentures, and the phenomenon of terminal lucidity in dementia patients. Chemistry cannot see through walls. Version B is quantum consciousness. This hypothesis is supported by scientists such as Sir Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff. The brain is not the producer of consciousness. It is a quantum computer and receiver. The soul is information recorded at the Planck scale inside neuronal microtubules. When the body dies, that quantum information does not disappear. Information cannot be destroyed according to the laws of physics. It simply returns to the common network, to the cloud. This version explains everything: why the experience is universal, why consciousness seems to observe from above, and why it can persist when the brain is switched off. From the logic and the data I received from AI, this version looks most likely. What conclusion can we draw? A sober, adult conclusion. I stared at this data for days and I realized one thing. It does not matter what you call it. Heaven, nirvana, the quantum field, dimension X. What matters is different. Death is not a shutdown, it is a transition. A change in the aggregate state of consciousness. And judging by thousands of reports, that transition is not frightening. What is frightening is to live a life that makes you wince during your life review. What is tragic is to waste time on hatred, knowing we are all tied together by the same web. Studying these 5,000 deaths paradoxically taught me how to live. It showed there is no chaos. There is structure, there is meaning, and there is responsibility. Maybe clinical death is just a keyhole we were allowed to peek through so we would stop being afraid and start living for real. Live as if your life review is happening right now, because in essence, that is exactly what is happening. Write in the comments if you or someone close to you had a similar experience in what you saw. These stories matter more than any statistic. I read every comment. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring how the world works without blinkers and without blindfolds. My name is The Thinker. See ya.